Thank you guys very much for joining us today. I am very, very grateful to be joined here by Dylan Alexander. You are our first guest on Zero Access Footy, and I appreciate you spending some time with me here today.
Happy to be here, mate. Yeah. Keen to chat about the draft and go through everything.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I don't have Bem next to me at the moment. He is feeling a little under the weather. You would have probably heard that at the start, but for those just listening into this clip, I do not have my co-host here, so it is up to me to try and bring his knowledge because, like I said to you beforehand, he's kind of the draft guy. So I'll do my best to try and fill that role in for him. But we'll get started. First off, more about yourself. How did you kind of get started following AFL draft content? What brought that into you?
It's a weird story. Like a lot of things kind of coalescing at the same time. So I was living overseas.
Yep.
Moved back home, and one of the ways I sort of reintegrated back with friends and stuff was getting back through football. Everyone's watching it. Everyone's involved with it. So that was kind of my in. So I started watching a lot more football. And at the same time, because I was moving back from overseas, I was essentially like looking for a different career. I was teaching English over there. So kind of went into some media stuff. I was making videos, doing stuff like that. And it just kind of all happened at the same time where I was doing a lot of football. And I just had one day, kind of got up, had this idea that I wanted to have a look at the draft. It was a bit of an interest. Took a camera along to one of the under-18s games, and that's pretty much how it started.
Yeah, so like from that moment you found the love just purely in the draft aspect, like almost watching them before they get to that like AFL stage.
For sure. And it's probably like that sounds a little bit of a simple thing. Like I did see in the content space, content that I was watching and that sort of thing, that there was probably a little bit of a market in the draft.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of different people following it, and the ones that were following it were probably doing the same sort of thing. And I thought you could bring, maybe a different lens to it as well.
Yeah, fantastic. You did mention that it was something you were overseas, right? And did you find yourself following football as a kid? Were you just a casual fan as a kid, or was it when you came back as that implementation with your friends to kind of enjoy football again and find something new?
I think I was always a big footy fan.
Yeah, fantastic.
So played as I was growing up, moved away and probably lost a little bit of a touching point with it just because I was, the distance, you're not watching the games every week and stuff like that. So lost it a little bit, but then sort of coming back, it all comes back. It's sort of like riding a bike.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're sort of like straight back into it, and I kind of got the love for it again. So
may I ask what year you came back to being a football fan? Because you're a North fan, right? So did you come back during the awful stages, or did you come back when we were still kind of on that?
Is this not bad now?
It could always get worse.
This is rock bottom, right? No,
surely it's rock bottom.
So I moved. The first year I was over was like 2014. So I think we were still sort of kicking around the finals at that time.
Yeah, that was, I remember that.
I still remember having a conversation with my dad while I was over there. And we just played Richmond and beaten them in a elimination final, I want to say.
Yes, no, I do remember. That was a Ben Cunnington
tackle. Yeah, that one. So that was sort of when I left and then came back 2022, so just after COVID. So I've kind of missed a lot of the losing. And I don't know, like, it's a little bit funny for a person who's been away from it for that long, and then we are in such a slump. It's sort of, you lose a bit of contact with it, and it just, I don't know.
Well, you just tell yourself, right, that you're there for the bad times, and then once we're good again, you can use that as kind of your leverage to why you're not a bandwagon fan.
Exactly. And I am also Tasmanian, so I always have that to fall back on as well.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, beautiful. Tassie's a lovely place too. Went there recently, so fantastic. But I'll try and push this away from North Melbourne, as I have a tendency of doing too much. What specifically about the draft interests you the most, right? Because there's so many aspects to watching these kids get better to the point that they're reaching that AFL standard, then the hype before they get drafted. Is there a certain point in covering that's most enjoyable? Do you just enjoy the general layout of the AFL draft and what that means for certain clubs?
I just think the amount of kind of touch points that go into it are so interesting. Like you've got all of the data, their athleticism, that side of it. You've got the statistics. Like if you were just picking it based on, and I think that's one area where people can go into. It's like the guy that gets 30 disposals in the midfield.
Yeah.
Draft that guy. That's the best player. But there's all of that sort of data. But then there's kind of also like building the story, so there's just so many aspects to it. So I look at when I kind of nut into that sort of building a story thing, you look at a player like Patrick Cripps, excuse me. He, in his draft year, he grew a lot.
Yeah.
So as he was sort of coming through 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, that sort of area, he was just a smaller kid pretty much the same size as everybody else. And he was able to, almost like in an ecosystem, like in the world, he was able to sort of adapt to that. So he had to not rely on his physicality. He had to, get the ball in close, use his hands, all of those sorts of things. And then when he did get that growth spurt, it sort of turns him into this.
Turns him into a all-encompassing type player.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of it as well. So you've got all of that data, the athleticism, but then you've also got the story of the player, their background, where they come from, their family, and all of that sort of stuff. So I just find the whole thing, putting that all together is fascinating.
No, absolutely. And it almost creates stories that you wouldn't find I think in specific to the Paddy Cripps case, right? How many times have you heard those types of stories where you very rarely hear an AFL player? I think the only one I can think of is Riley Thilthorpe, where like they just change in stature and nature so dramatically. So those types of things come out of nowhere. And then of course it's a national game and you've got all these kids continuously getting better. So new names pop up. And I think, the storyline, like you mentioned, is fantastic too.
And you've got different states as well, different leagues, the competitiveness of those leagues. So it's really interesting. And then you get to watch the national champs. They all come together. But like on the flip side to that, what I said about Patrick Cripps, you can kind of get the opposite of that as well. If you're a giant and you're physically better than everyone else, maybe you don't adapt to all those inside skills and little things because you don't have to. You can rely on your physicality. So it's fascinating, and probably I think most footy fans have some interest in the draft, even passively. Yeah, like they'll talk about it. Who do you reckon is going to be better out of these two young players? Like it's kind of always in the. It's
almost like a superiority battle in a whole other sense off the field.
Yeah, and everyone's got an opinion on it. You post something on Instagram, like a redraft or something, everybody wants their say on it. So,
that sounds like a fun little tale that you can always explain to people.
Yeah, exactly.
This person didn't like my opinion again.
Exactly, and everyone. That's kind of the beauty of it. Everyone's got their opinion. Yeah, so there's no right or wrong.
Fantastic. Well, I think in the sense, we talk a lot about AFL, especially on this podcast and especially on your channel yourself. Are there other sports that maybe affect the way that you cover Australian football? In sense, maybe NBA with a lot of hot takes and headliner opinions that really try to grab people's eyes straight from the beginning, or maybe even more in the less eccentric way. Are there other ways that you take other sports or other sports that you're interested in that you use in your content creation?
For sure. I think probably the biggest one for me, and it's because I'm into this sport a bit more, but definitely like the soccer, European soccer, is probably the biggest one that I take from. I'm interested in. It's fundamentally the two sports are too different to be able to compare, right?
Yeah, I get you.
In the sense that you want to be able to build those teams, like in a football team, in a soccer team, that is, you're able to kind of build the team. Every player can potentially be like world class. There's only 11 spots to fill.
Exactly.
You're creating players from like all over the world. So there's so much talent. Whereas AFL, you've got to look a little bit more to the top end of your team. You're probably only going to have 5 really, really talented players in the team.
Yeah.
As far as like making the content and how that goes, I probably do lean off some of those people. I mean, probably how I got into the whole content creation in the first place is those channels like True Geordie, like the Kickoff and all that sort of stuff, the club, those sorts of shows. So definitely influenced by those people, but I guess you've still got to kind of get that back to Australian audiences, right? Like you've got to think about the sensibilities. I think Australians tend to be a little bit more like community based and like their local football, and are a little bit more inward thinking in that sense than some of those, and you've got to take those things as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I think in regards to the European soccer, right, I almost want to kind of dive away from, looking at that aspect. In terms of some of the things happening in the soccer, is there any relation at all to what it brings to the AFL? Right, so the way that they cover the soccer over there, and especially, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the large money sums that they get over there compared to our game. Obviously, because it's a world game, it's going to bring money in there. Do you bring any comparison to the way you will maybe cover some of the I guess, draft over here, in the sense of their system being more of a purchaser player? And do all your scouting there. They don't really have that type of draft system. So do you try and take the small aspects from that sport and then bring it to this draft sport?
Definitely as far as the talent ID aspect. Yeah. And I think particularly one thing that soccer is really good for is you look at a player, like you look at a midfielder and you look at the attributes that they need to be able to do it. And I think soccer's really simple for this. You probably need an attacking midfielder that's really good on the ball.
Yeah.
You need that sort of like box-to-box guy that's super athletic, and then a defensive guy that can probably spray the ball around a little bit, but he's also got that, defensive mongrel in him and those sorts of things. And I think you can bring that specialisation that soccer has, because it is much more of a specialised, each position has different attributes. I think you can bring that to the AFL, which tends to be a sport where it's a little bit more all-encompassing. Like every player, you want them to sort of do bits and pieces, flip around. 1 minute you have a midfielder that's playing in the forward half of the ground. They might go to half back.
Yeah.
Everyone's chopping and changing, and it's kind of modular. So, but at the end of the day, they still do have those primary positions. So you can sort of bring that stuff into it. And I find like the positional play and stuff like that of soccer, you can take a little bit from that. As far as the entire draft system, like soccer's completely different in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So you're doing transfer fees. You can kind of, how much money your club makes dictates the quality of player.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I was, interested in the most, because their whole system is completely different to the way that AFL does their thing, obviously playing with a lot less money. So I'm very interested to see how you'll almost judge clubs using their picks and using their money when it comes to that type of stuff.
There's just in general a lot less player movement in the AFL as well.
That too, yeah.
So you don't have the opportunity to be able to trade and bring players in from other clubs as much. Like obviously we have our trade period, but ultimately you are going to have to come to the draft quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that's where it probably becomes a little bit more like the American sports a bit more. You're thinking, NFL, you look to those sports. But again, even AFL, it's quite different to the NBA just because of the fact that we don't have the college system as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, I love that it makes it unique. It makes it a whole unique process, and I love the way that you can kind of cover that while it seems that you are bringing other aspects into it and making its own thing. So.
Yeah, for sure. You try to as much as you can, and obviously those sports who have, had a system for longer, there's more money in the game, which means they can look to different avenues. Yeah. I mean, they were using data a lot earlier than what the AFL was, for example. Yeah. So being able to go to those things, pull those triggers, and like you can learn a lot from those sports for sure. And if you look at the best people in the AFL, that are the movers and shakers, they've generally looked to the States for their sort of, draft IQ.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, to keep it on the personal stage, right, we talked about your influence through other sports. I wanted to ask maybe, I don't think it's too personal of a question, but more an idea as to your career path, right? Do you kind of wish to make this more like a professional full-time work? I'm not sure what it looks like in terms of your week, and I'm not going to ask you to personally lay out your week for me.
No,
but
that's cool.
In the sense of this work and what you do and the studying that you do for the AFL draft, do you wish to get to a certain stage where it's your number one reliance and monetarily? Do you wish to get to the point where you're recognised a bit more within like the most professional manner of AFL draft analysis and scouting and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea. I guess like you've got to build that up over time. At the moment, I'm sort of doing it at the moment. Like I've come out of study. I'm still sort of just doing this now. This is like the second year. Last year I was studying alongside doing it.
Yeah.
So this is kind of my first year of doing it full time, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Well, it's research, it's study, right? People, if you're to be taken seriously, people need to know that you're doing the research and putting in the hours to know that you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I'd imagine it's got to be a lot of countless hours of watching film and watching notes and reading data and stuff like that.
Watching a lot of games, particularly. Probably one thing that I've changed a little bit over the last kind of 6 months is probably looking at stats a little bit less.
Yeah, okay, I get you.
Just in the sense of just sort of using your eye, making more notes about what players do at particular times in games and those sorts of things, rather than just using, relying on data. But certainly, like doing this, like you have to watch tons of football.
Absolutely.
And that's if you're a recruiter or you're kind of working in the media, and you need to be across the AFL as well, because you need to know what those teams, and you need to be able to see, for context, the difference between the different leagues as well. You've got the AFL there. How is that different? Like, how is that different to VFL football, to lower league football? What is fundamentally, like what sort of athleticism and things do the players need, the skills that they need to be able to step up to that level? And you kind of got to be working that. And that's changing all the time as well. So you kind of got to adapt to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think from there, I want to ask, how does your weekend look? Because I'd imagine that's probably your busiest time period, correct?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So weekend is, it's probably most of the time it's 2 games of footy a week. Like it's one on Saturday and it's one on Sunday, just because you can't get to.
Yeah, you wouldn't be traveling everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like there'll be sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a double header.
Yeah.
So you have 2 games at the same ground back to back.
Fantastic.
And you can do that. That's
Makes life
wonderful.
easier.
Yeah, I think they had one of those in round 1 from memory. They've had a couple of others like that, but most of the time you're just getting one game. And if you drove to the other one, you'd have to miss half the other one. So you just do one.
Yeah.
Essentially. And then you'll go home, you watch whatever's come up on the streams. And then Sunday, you'll pretty much go again. So at the moment in the schedule, it's looking sort of like APS footy, like school football of a Saturday, and then Coates Talent League of a Sunday. And that's like another aspect of it as well. You sort of
absolutely.
You get this exodus in the middle of the season from the Coates Talent League, which is sort of your main league here.
Yeah.
And then everybody starts going into school footy. You got to keep an eye on that as well.
Oh, mate, it sounds like a lot. Do you do it just by yourself? Is this a solo venture, or do you bring other people along?
I do have help from my wife. So she does, like we do some video content, some photography and stuff like that. So
Fantastic.
at the game, she does that for me, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And when we sort of like do streams and videos, she kind of helps me on the back end with a bit of that stuff. But other than that, it's solo, yeah.
Well, the help is always appreciated, I'd imagine.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you mentioned you go back and doing all the studying from home while you're there. Is it simply note-taking while you are at the games? Are there very simple things that you leave yourself to so that you can properly take in and ingest everything that you're seeing from the game? Or is it a whole load of different things you're trying to grab while you're there?
Yeah, so it's pretty much like note-taking little moments in the games,
Yeah.
like the decisions, if you notice something good, but also being able to like notice something bad as well, and then sort of keep note of that. I usually go back and put that into a spreadsheet, which is sort of weighted on different attributes.
Yeah.
And then I can sort of work through some sort of a ranking system of the players. And obviously you take into consideration positions and where you think they're going to go at the AFL level, potential upside with their like athleticism. So maybe they don't do some of those fundamentals very well, but you know, they're 195 centimeters. They can, you know, run like a 400 meter run and stuff like that. So you're sort of like weighing everything up, but through the games, it's pretty much like note taking of what they're doing. And then being able to understand like the seriousness of the moment in the game. And I think that's one thing too, when you're watching all of these games, you've got Coates League, you've got some sort of representative footy as well, but that APS football is really important for that as well, because it's probably a little bit more on the line in those games. Like every game really matters, whereas Coates League sort of doesn't, to be honest, for most of the season. And then you get to finals and it does matter.
And that's when it starts to ramp up.
Yeah, yeah. So you've kind of got to watch games with all of that in mind as well.
Okay. So in that sense, right, do you find yourself like looking out for key matchups during those not so serious times to kind of really get an idea as to how they may play when they get to a competitive level, right? They're coming up against talent that's also trying to get themselves to the AFL. Do you try your best to prioritize certain games, or is it just whatever game you can get to, you go and you try and work something out?
I mean, there's obviously a logistical ease of sometimes you will just take the low-hanging fruit as far as like what's easier for you logistically. But no, definitely you look across those APS games, if there's a lot of players that you really want to see and you want to see in that particular game, like you definitely pick that.
Yeah.
And so, same with the Talent League, really. Like it was last year, there was a lot of Sandringham Dragons games going to those just because they had so many players. So you get to see more at a particular time. But then again, you do have to watch all of the teams because you've got to be looking for guys that are coming through as well. You don't want to just get stuck just looking at the top guys.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And maybe that influences exactly what games you go to, right? If you've kind of got notes on certain players, correct?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And then it gets a little bit easier as it starts to narrow towards the finals. You get less games. They do tend to play those double headers and you get to watch more footy anyway. So
yeah, fantastic. Beautiful.
Kind of works it out for you.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, I kind of want to see where your head goes in terms of your own work compared to others, right? Do you find yourself comparing your draft notes or your analysis to other people's analysis? Do you try and strictly stay in your own mind so that you know what your opinion is, you're not basing it too much off of others? Or are you happy to kind of work around what other people are saying as well?
It's a good question. I definitely look at what other people do, but I do feel like with the sort of methods that I have now that I've sort of worked over, particularly coming into this year, I think I've been a lot more, maybe in that sense, like a bit more of a front runner with the rankings and stuff. I've been able to get that out first because I can sort of trust the system that I have, like putting it into rankings, being able to put all the data in that I want to, the moments, and consider all of that and come out with some sort of a a genuine ranking, and that makes me not really have to look at anybody else's rankings.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, you have a look. like if Cal Toomey drops a ranking or something, you have a bit of a look to see who he's got there.
Yeah. Do you find sorry to interrupt, do you find yourself almost backing off some of your thoughts because of what people like that say?
I think sometimes if you see one that's a real outlier and you see like, geez, got that guy high.
Yeah.
You do sometimes question, what have I missed?
Yeah.
And you will go back and have a look at those things. But on some level, you have to trust yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I get you.
You have to, and I think that's with my content, that's what I've tried to do, not go off, I guess, like what you hear. Because when you start to like operate in these circles, you talk to people, you hear things off recruiters. This club likes this guy. I'd sort of rather keep it as me, as sort of an individual, and it's my opinion.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like I'm reporting on it, but I'm actually like immersive, if that makes sense.
No,
like
I get what you're saying. No, I understand.
I'm sort of a recruiter on the ground as a content creator.
Yeah. I think talking on that, I kind of want to get a bit deeper now into some of the current headlines or storylines going on within the AFL draft scene, because obviously this is stuff that you keep on top of, and it would be really nice to maybe hear some of your aspects that maybe you haven't even been able to get to on your platforms, if you're okay with that.
Totally, mate. Totally. It's free game.
That's it. So first, I want to talk, very recently it was announced that Tassie is going to be getting some compensation picks. Compensation in the sense that, you know, they're starting off, but they are getting picks 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13, with some of them being restricted to just being traded. It's somewhat similar to North's draft concession that I think you would have mentioned before. Do you have any general thoughts on the idea? Do you think it's a good little draft hand that they've got? Do you think it's almost overdoing it? Anything like that?
I think that it's important for that Tasmanian side when they come into the AFL to be competitive. I think it's a little bit different to the situation with the New South Wales teams and the Queensland teams coming in, just because they were going into new markets and they didn't really have any fans on the ground anyway.
Yeah. When
they first sort of hit the road. So they sort of build them up over time. It was more of a young player pool. I think with this, it's quite good how they're sort of forcing them into making some of those trades, but they are still going to get top end talent. I think from what I've read and what I saw, they were going to get picks 1, 3, and maybe 5 that they didn't have to trade. And then it was after that they were trading.
I'm not 100% sure. I can get one of the other boys to quickly fact check that and write that down for me. But
sure.
I believe, I think I just saw a thumbs up. So yes, you are correct.
yeah. It was something along those lines anyway. But I don't think it's overkill. I think you do need, when you have those teams coming in, like they do need to be able to hang their hat on something. They need some big players, and the fact that they're going to be able to trade those picks or have to trade those picks will force them, I think, into getting some, you know, ready-made players, some stars from other clubs and that sort of thing. So no, I think it works. And as long as, I think for Tasmanians that are down there, they're going to want to, they're probably going to need to see.
They're going to need a reason to see that team. Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Because Tasmanians are already affiliated with other clubs, like myself, a North fan, being Tasmanian. So they kind of need a reason to be able to go to the footy and sort of support that team, and I think that'll help. Yeah,
for sure. You mentioned and touched on the way that the other teams have been made. So GWS and Gold Coast, I think you said Sydney team, so GWS in particular. But both Gold Coast as well, right? Comparing this to their situation, do you believe that they maybe have done it better? Because obviously both sides started off their seasons, Gold Coast probably in a lot worse of a way. They haven't made finals yet, but both of them started off as wooden spooners in the first year.
Yep.
And maybe we've come to expect that from expansion teams, but do you think maybe that the way they had worked with GWS and Gold Coast, this is a bit better? It's going to give them a bit more of a chance to be competitive from the get-go?
I think so. I think it's a little bit more in line with like the GWS model too, in that they're going to have to get quite a number of ready-made players. If I think back to, I think Gold Coast more went down the model of taking like one big name player, taking Gary Ablett, of course, and then pretty much relied on the rest being kids. And I think you're going to need a lot more diversity in the leadership. And I think ultimately those two clubs, like GWS, who have been not successful in winning a premiership, but they've been on-field successful. The way, like what it's all going to come down to essentially is how the club is set up.
Absolutely.
From a management point of view, from like a culture point of view, when they bring in players, getting those players to be able to stay there enjoy it, enjoy their time in Tassie and sort of make it a destination club. I think that's most of the modern teams that are successful and doing well have an element of that. You look at Geelong and the Giants are doing it really well up there. They're not really getting too many players leaving unless they're kind of like pushed out of the side or something like that.
And the way that they also have managed to create talent through their, I believe their NGAs, and is it the NGA that they've used? They have a really nice talent pathway is what I'm trying to
for
kind
sure.
of get at.
So the northern clubs get they get their own academies.
That's it.
So the difference, you mentioned NGA. The NGAs are for the traditional football states.
Yes.
The clubs of those teams, and they get them if the player's from a diversified background. So parents are born overseas, Indigenous backgrounds, like Jamara Ugle-Hagan as an Indigenous player, he was an NGA to the Western Bulldogs. The northern clubs get their own full academies, so they get full access to all the players that they recruit from their zone. So that's kind of the difference maker there. Tassie, as I understand, they'll be more along the NGA path as they're a traditional
footy state is what you're trying to say. Beautiful. That's why we have you on, because my lack of draft knowledge was showing there a little bit.
Totally fine.
Yeah, beautiful. On top of that, right, the way that Tassie is going to draft, do you think, it may be thinking way too far ahead, the way they're going to draft, do you think they're going to aim to draft Tassie talent through their NGA? Like, try and put as many of their NGA talent with those picks that they own to begin with? Are they going to try and look out for them? Or do you think they'd look for best talent available? Because you mentioned how teams sometimes struggle and the culture around a club will struggle to keep players around because they're not a winning club or they want to go back home, whatever it may be. Do you think Tassie works on building that culture first? Or do they look for best players available to be competitive as possible?
This is a multifaceted question. I think on some level, you have to look at best available talent because there's just not enough talent coming through for all of, 18 clubs.
Yeah.
Most of the talent they're pulling from is coming out of Victoria anyway.
Yeah.
So like Tasmania is not going to be able to support itself going for local talent purely. So they're going to have to go for the best available players. Now, one thing that interstate clubs have done with drafting is rather than go for players out of Vic Metro, they've gone for players out of the country and from other states because they tend to be less likely to want to come back.
Yep.
I don't fully understand why that's the case, but
I couldn't tell you.
yeah. Vic Metro kids, and sometimes that ends up just coming down to talent level. And if you're a high draft pick, you have a little bit more leverage to be able to move, right? So, but clubs like, I know Port Adelaide are one, the Giants are one that definitely do target. Like if they've got a 50-50 call, they'll target the kid from interstate or from Vic Country as opposed to Vic Metro. So that's something that they can look at. But ultimately with just the lack of talent across the whole board in any draft year, you're going to have to be taking
best available.
Yeah, because you'll get to a stage, if you're just going for local players or players from Vic Country, you'll just have a dearth there. You'll just have a hole at the top end of your team and other teams will be able to exploit that.
Yeah, understandable. I want to shift now to the most upcoming draft. You've talked a lot about it on your channel now because we are in the prime season of it all. We're ready to kind of look at all these players coming into the next year. Give us your thoughts on this upcoming draft. Do you think it compares well or poorly to the last, let's say, 5 drafts, right? It's probably going to be hard to compare it to most recent drafts because I've always gone under the understanding that you can't really give your opinion or your full opinion on a draft until about 4 or 5 years later because you don't know whether they may have a bounce back, whether they may drop off from their standard. But to your best ability, can you compare this draft to the most recent drafts up to about 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I'd say it's looking so far, and again, it's difficult to know exactly what a draft looks like even at this point, trying to look at it sort of like globally, I don't know, like until the national champs, because that's when you kind of get to see everyone play against each other. Even last year's draft, which was kind of called a super draft, people called it, even that early, it wasn't really called that in the front half of the year.
Yeah, okay.
People weren't really saying that until the back end of the year, and it started to look really deep. I would say this draft so far, it's more along the lines of like 2023, where you had some really top-end talent at the end, probably goes through until the first round, and then it's probably going to start to drop away. I think there's going to be a gap there, and clubs that have picks outside that sort of first round are probably not going to be as keen. There'll obviously be some good players that come from outside that, but it's more in line with 2023 than the depth of 2024. But, potentially with some of the talent that is up the top end of this draft, it's potentially better maybe in that top 5.
Yeah, okay. Do you find it difficult to rate players highly if they haven't played against those like best opposition players? Because as you mentioned, the Vic Championships, was it? That's usually where most of the excitement comes from, where they're playing the best of the best. Do you find it hard to then change positions drastically if we're in this part where they're still kind of getting themselves warmed up?
Yeah, to answer the question shortly, yes, it is difficult because you want... When you start to get into the national championship side of it, you're starting to, that's really getting to the talent is good enough across the entire teams that we're looking like AFL standard. You can sort of roughly compare that to AFL. And people will talk a lot about the VFL, like VFL exposure being important. I would say that's less important than the national championships because your VFL guys, as much as they're bigger bodies, they're not as talented. Mm-hmm. So comparing them and looking at them, like that context is really important. So seeing them in the national championships is kind of, when you're building this picture, it is kind of everything. That being said, the best players are going to still stand out at Coates Talent League level. Like some guys you can see. You can see
they've got the goods to go.
Yeah. I remember like the Richmond recruiter last year talking about, he saw Sam Lawler, I think, in March and said he'll be the number 1 pick. Which he ended up being.
That's a crazy call out. Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but yeah, you can obviously see who's talented, but I think some guys that maybe aren't showing themselves yet, that national champs will be a big time for them to rise. So you'll get a few that come through at that point.
Yeah. Obviously it's early, but would you say there's any bolters or kind of people that have dropped off the early stages, sorry?
I would say, back to that conversation that we had a little bit earlier about bigger body players.
Yes.
Players with strength that can tend to dominate. Dyson Sharp is a player from South Australia who probably, since under 16s, has dominated this crop. Like he's been the best player in this crop the entire way through.
Yep.
I think the start of this season, you've seen that he's probably dropped a little bit. I think he's probably still in that sort of top 15, top 20 sort of a group, but everyone was, at the beginning of the season, everyone was saying he's going to be the clear number 1, but I think he's probably a slider at this point, just based on everybody else's rapid improvement, and he's probably just sort of plateaued a little bit.
Okay.
I look at someone like Rory Wright from the Sandringham Dragons, and I think this happens a little bit with those Vic Metro Talent League clubs where you don't get to see a lot of them in their bottom age year. The Vic Country teams, they'll probably get a little bit more exposure. The interstate clubs like South Australia, Western Australia, they'll get bottom age guys that'll play midfield minutes, in their bottom age year, where Sandringham Dragons won't. So Rory Wright's a big one for that. Wouldn't have got into that midfield last year that had Murphy Reid, Levi Ashcroft, these types of players in there. He's now stepped into that Dragons midfield and just looks amazing. He's got an unbelievable left peg, good physicality, good size for a midfielder, good overhead. So he's kind of got he's probably one that's come into that top 10. And Sam Grill, Oakley Chargers, so a similar story, didn't get exposure in the midfield. Looks like Chris Judd at the moment running around in the Coates League with his explosive speed. So, yeah, that's probably the biggest one so far.
Yeah, okay. Are you looking to watch those guys more often now, or are you kind of looking to see if there's others who may be moving up or down?
I think with those guys, it's sort of about consistency. I've sort of seen, particularly like their athletic ability, I can kind of see what they can do right about now. Champs will be big for me watching them.
Yeah.
Probably through this period of the season, though, I'm probably less watching them, and I'm more looking for guys that are pushing their case, coming through maybe those like kind of later bolters up until the national champs, and then you'll sort of go back to your bread and butter at the champs again, looking at those top guys to see how they go.
Yeah.
In with the quality that's around them.
So you're trying to get almost a full page picture at all as many players as you possibly can to get the best look. And then once champs comes in, that's kind of like the ready to go. All right, let's finalize where these guys will end up in the draft type situation.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
That's exactly right. And yeah, other than that, you might even just see like a game that Sam Grill's in. I've seen a lot of him play in this front half of the year, but if there's a close game that he's in, I want to kind of see what he's doing in the big moments, in the last quarter. If there's a goal to be kicked on the line, what does he do at the stoppage? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to ask you one final question, and it's probably one that's way too early to ask in your field.
Love it.
But for the content, for the sake of the content, if you were to give me a top 5 prediction right now, your top 5 draft, right? And there's a lot to consider.
Yep.
Which team will take him? We'll go with the positions now. So we'll have West Coast would be 1.
Yep.
Richmond would be 2 because it's not North. Then it would be Richmond again at 3. Melbourne at 4 right now. And I can't remember who's in 13th. Let me quickly double check that.
Do a quick check and I'll start using my brain.
Yes, I will quickly do that for you. But yes, like I said, West Coast 1, Richmond 2, Richmond 3, Melbourne 4. Sydney's actually 5 right now. Sydney.
That's incredible. Well, so they're interesting too because they've got an academy. Do you want me to include academy players in this?
Can someone let me know very quickly, do Melbourne still have their pick? Is it Essendon's pick?
It is.
It's Essendon's pick.
That's Essendon's pick. Yeah. And North Melbourne's is Richmond.
Yes, so it'd be, unfortunately. West Coast, Richmond, Essendon, and Sydney. That is a crazy top 5 just off the bat.
So straight away there, like Sydney will not want to hang on to that pick.
Yeah.
Because they have an academy player. So they'll want to offload that to get points to be able to match on Max King, who is their kind of top guy. Okay, so West Coast, I'm still sticking with my number 1 guy, Cooper Duff Tytler.
Yeah, the ruckman. That actually makes sense out of all of them.
It works for them.
Yeah.
I think Richmond would love to have him as well. He's just such an athletic specimen, this guy. Think Tom De Koning, but probably moves better, definitely kicks the football better, can pass the ball like a midfielder at
Bloody hell.
200 centimetres. So he's incredible. And I think he's got such physicality and competitiveness to his game. I think he really suits like the modern ruck and he'll be able to push forward.
Absolutely.
Do all of that. I'll still hold with Dersmer at 2.
Yep.
To the Tigers. I think that could change. He's been putting down some pretty big midfield performances this season. Like he had 36 in round 1. Went back in there at the weekend for Gippsland and had 28. He's pretty good. He's just such a smooth mover.
Yeah, lovely.
Runs like a gazelle.
Fantastic.
So much upside with Dersmer. Then you've got some academy guys. So you got like Zeke Euland from the Gold Coast Academy.
Yep.
He'll get a bid somewhere in that top 5, I imagine. Max King runs a 20-metre sprint in like 2.8 seconds. And
so Sydney are keen to get him.
He's basically Isaac Heaney 2.0.
Fantastic. That's perfect for them.
Yep. They would love that. So I'll go to the main draw of the draft, if that makes sense, without those academy guys. Next, I'd have Sam Grill.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one I spoke about.
Yes, the one,
mini Chris Judd.
Yes.
Probably over-egging that a little bit. But
mini Chris Judd is crazy. But
like West Coast.
If it works, we can come back to this and say, look, I saw this coming from a mile away.
At the moment, he is running around in like the talent league and in school footy, literally just like showing guys the footy and like running around them.
Oh, mate. I'll tell you what, this makes me want to go and watch them.
It's really
makes me
fun.
want to go and see them.
It's really fun. And when you get a player like that, it's really fun to watch. It's absolutely amazing. The champs will be big for him, but he's right up there. And Josh Lindsay already won 2 best on ground medals in the academy games and also the futures game that was on grand final day. So he's awesome as well. He's a bit more of I'd say like a cerebral type player, not as athletically gifted, but just reads the game really well, sets up behind the play, kicks a footy really well. Moves a bit like Pendlebury.
Yeah.
Like if you want a player comparison, but I don't want to put those lofty expectations.
The expectations, I'd imagine that's some of the hardest things to do.
It is, but when I say that, I don't want people to say like, oh, he's the next Scott Pendlebury. I just mean
he's got comparable features.
Exactly, and maybe positionally, he could do that sort of a role.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Which sort of paints a picture. So is that 5?
I think you mentioned 6 there. So it was what? We had Cooper, the ruckman.
Yep.
Second was Willem Dersmer. Third was
Grill. Oh, Euland's academy though.
Yeah, Euland Academy. Oh, we'll go third, then Grill.
Yep.
If we're going to ignore the 2 other pretty much expected guaranteed picks through academy reasons.
Yep.
Grill. Fourth was
Lindsay. And then I will go Oliver Greaves. He's the last one. So he is. I don't know if you're familiar with Josh Smiley from the 2024 draft.
I had actually heard you mention him before. He's with the Richmond boys at the moment.
Yep. So he went at, I guess it was pick 6.
Yep.
194 centimetre, enormous bodied midfielder.
Yeah.
Just a huge lump of a man.
And could be fantastic for their midfield in the future.
For sure. Just brings that, size and physicality and reach.
And Greaves is similar?
Very similar. So both of those players play for the Eastern Rangers. obviously both playing for the academy side for Vic Metro, both wearing the number 26.
So that's going to be beef coming.
It's like a clone, basically.
That's scary.
It's a weird one. So he's 191, so he's a little bit shorter, but he's probably a little bit better overhead.
Yeah.
And I think he kicks the football just as well. So
fantastic. Well, there you go. We'll hopefully come back and we'll be spot on with our. We ended up going a top 7 or 8.
Yeah, if you include the academies.
Yeah, including the academies. So we'll come back and see how it goes. But nonetheless, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and I'm really, really appreciative of the insight you've managed to give me and hopefully the people watching.
Thanks for having me, Rhys. Loved it.
Yeah, I hope to get you on later on towards the pointy end. If we championship side of things.
Exactly. If you go post the champs, a lot more info.
Yeah. Well, we'll look to try and get you back on. And of course, if you haven't seen him already, be sure to go and check out Dylan Alexander over on YouTube. Are there any other social medias that you may want to shout?
Just Instagram, I guess.
Instagram?
Posting essentially trickle down in some ways. My Instagram from my YouTube, but doing sort of like the rankings and things like that and just player information. So anything that's happened with like injuries or anything like that, performances will be on there as well. So if you want the short form, go to Insta, long form, YouTube.
Absolutely. So make sure to go and check him out. And of course, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all of that good stuff for Zero Access Footy. And we hope to see you again. And best of luck for the rest of the year. Obviously, you've got a big task ahead in the scouting process. So I wish you the best of luck. And I enjoy what you do. And I very much appreciate having you on.
Oh, thanks, Rhys. Thanks for having me.